I was boarding a flight to Las Vegas with my son and daughter-in-law for what they called a family bonding trip. Everything felt normal until the flight attendant grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. She leaned in so close I could feel her breath and whispered, "Act sick. Get off this plane. Do it now." I was about to laugh until I saw the sheer panic in her eyes, so I did exactly what she said. 20 minutes later, she handed me something that left me in complete shock. Before I tell you what that flight attendant showed me, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from, and would you trust a stranger's warning about your own family? At 70, I'd settled into a quiet rhythm in my Phoenix home. After 40 years as a CPA, I valued order, the steady tick of routine, the slow mornings with coffee on the patio. Since Barbara passed 5 years ago, the silence had become familiar, almost comforting. This house was mine in a way nothing else had ever been. Everything shifted 8 months ago when my son Brennan and his wife Sabrina moved in. Brennan had lost his marketing job, corporate downsizing, he said, voice low, shoulders slumped. He was 42, discouraged, and I opened my door without hesitation. He was my only child. But the son who once called every Sunday seemed to vanish the moment he came home. Now he avoided conversation, slipping away after dinner, eyes always cast downward. There was a heaviness to him I couldn't reach. Sabrina, though, settled herself into the heart of the house with surprising ease. She took over the grocery shopping, the scheduling, and eventually the bills. She was always helpful, always pleasant, always involved. Too involved. One evening, while we watched the news, she casually mentioned my life insurance policy. $750,000, she said with a soft smile. That's really generous planning, Fred. Most people your age don't think that far ahead. I remember wondering how she knew the exact figure. This morning, while I was reviewing bank statements, a habit I'd never quite retired from Sabrina appeared in the doorway. Perfect hair, bright smile, eyes too sharp. "Fred, I have the most wonderful idea," she said, settling across from me. "What would you think about a family trip to Las Vegas, just the three of us? A long weekend. My treat." I blinked. In 8 months, neither she nor Brennan had shown any interest in family bonding. "Las Vegas," I said. "That's very generous, but—" I insist, she cut in. "Brennan and I want more quality time together, before life gets too complicated." "Before what gets complicated?" Brennan hovered in the doorway behind her hands buried in his pockets. He didn't look at me when he said, "It could be fun, Dad, like old times." We'd never had old times in Las Vegas. Sabrina pulled up flight details on her phone. Tickets. The Bellagio. Leaving this afternoon. That was when the numbers stopped adding up. They were both unemployed. They were living in my home. And yet flights were already researched, maybe booked, before asking me. I'd spent 4 decades catching discrepancies no one else noticed. The same instinct that flagged missing decimal points now whispered in the back of my skull. "Something is wrong. This afternoon is rather sudden," I said carefully. She laughed light and airy. Sometimes the best memories come from spontaneity, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, and Brennan looked like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. Still, I heard myself say, "All right, Las Vegas it is." Her relief was immediate, too immediate. As we packed for the airport, the warning bells only grew louder. The generous offer, the rush, the mention of my insurance. Brennan's guilt hanging in the air like smoke. 40 years of auditing taught me to trust the numbers. And the numbers here were wrong. 3 hours later, we stood at Phoenix Sky Harbor's departure gate. Sabrina checked her watch repeatedly while Brennan fidgeted with his phone, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by nervous anticipation. "Flight 447 to Las Vegas, now boarding Group A," announced the gate agent. Sabrina immediately stood, pulling Brennan along. "We're in the first group. Fred, you're in Group C. See you on board." I found it odd they'd checked in separately, but nodded as they disappeared down the jetway. When my group was called, I discovered my seat was several rows behind theirs. They were already settled heads bent in quiet conversation. As I stowed my carry-on, a flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Seraphina Brooks. When she leaned down to check my seatbelt, her voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Sir, you need to get off this plane right now." I looked up startled. "Excuse me." Her eyes darted toward Brennan and Sabrina, then back to me. The professional mask had slipped, revealing genuine terror. "Please," she whispered, gripping my armrest. "Trust me, you're in danger." The fear in her eyes was real, immediate. My accountant's brain recognized authenticity when I saw it. Without understanding why, I pressed my hand to my chest and gasped loudly. "My heart! Something's wrong." The response was immediate. Serafina called for medical assistance while crew members gathered around. I continued the performance as they helped me up, clutching my chest dramatically. Through the commotion, I caught sight of Brennan and Sabrina's faces. What I saw changed everything. Not concern or panic, but disappointment. Raw, undisguised disappointment before they quickly masked it with fake worry. "Dad, what's happening?" Brennan called out, but his voice lacked a son's genuine urgency. "We should come with you," Sabrina added, though she made no move to leave her seat. "Stay put," Serafina said, firmly blocking the aisle. "Medical personnel are standing by." Once we reached the terminal medical office, Serafina closed the door and pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. "I recorded this in the restroom before boarding. Your daughter-in-law was on a call." She pressed play, and Sabrina's voice filled the room, clinical and cold. "The altitude will make the heart attack look natural. He won't taste the drug in his drink. Emergency response at 30,000 feet is limited." A pause. $750,000, and Brennan is finally committed to this. The words hit like physical blows. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, had agreed to murder me for insurance money. Through the terminal window, I watched Flight 447 push back taxi toward the runway and disappear into the desert sky. "My father," Serafina said quietly, tears in her eyes. 3 years ago, his nephew convinced him to change his will. Then he fell downstairs. They called it an accident. I couldn't prove anything. She met my gaze. When I heard that conversation, I couldn't let it happen again. The taxi ride home felt surreal. Brennan and Sabrina were in Las Vegas now, probably wondering why their plan had failed, scrambling to adjust their strategy. The familiar streets of Phoenix blurred past as my mind struggled to process the betrayal. My own son had plotted my death with the cold calculation of a business transaction. The insurance money, the sudden trip, the altitude, it had all been carefully planned. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both Serafina's conscience and my survival instincts. As I watched their plane disappear into the clouds, I realized I had 3 days alone to uncover the full truth. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that evening. Without Brennan and Sabrina's presence, the tension that had been building for months finally released. For the first time in 8 months, I was truly alone, and that solitude would become my greatest advantage. Wednesday morning, I began the most important audit of my career. At First National Bank, Theodora Grimsby provided complete transaction histories for all my accounts. The printouts confirmed my worst fears. $52,000 had been systematically transferred over 6 months in carefully calculated amounts to avoid fraud alerts. But it was the signatures that made my blood run cold. 4 decades of examining financial documents had trained me to spot forgeries instantly. The signatures authorizing these transfers weren't mine, though they were skillful attempts to mimic my handwriting. "Theodora," I said, pointing to an authorization form, "I never signed this." Her face paled. "Mr. Ashworth, if this is fraudulent—" "Not yet," I interrupted. "I need the full scope first." Back home, I spread every financial document across my dining room table. What I discovered was systematic fraud on a massive scale. The life insurance beneficiary form dated 6 months ago showed my primary beneficiary changed from Barbara's Charity Foundation to Brennan Ashworth. The signature was forged, good enough for casual observers, but not someone trained to spot discrepancies. A power of attorney document granted Brennan complete financial authority, supposedly signed when medical records claimed I was suffering early-stage dementia. Records I'd never seen from doctors I'd never visited, documenting cognitive decline I'd never experienced. The fabricated medical files were most disturbing. According to these reports, I'd been experiencing memory loss and confusion for over a year. The perfect justification for a son to control his father's finances. Thursday brought another revelation. In Brennan's old room, I found a hidden shoebox containing letters from creditors and threatening messages from gambling operations. The numbers were devastating. Brennan owed $95,000 to bookmakers and loan sharks. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, falling back on old forensic accounting habits. The timeline became crystal clear as I entered the dates. 8 months ago, Brennan had moved in claiming job loss. 6 months later, the financial fraud began in earnest. Then 3 months ago, based on the increasingly threatening letter, dates the murder plot had been conceived. I photographed every document, scanned every signature, created digital backups. Years of conducting audits had taught me to preserve evidence in multiple formats. I uploaded copies to secure cloud storage and burned additional copies to encrypted drives. The fraud was extensive and thoroughly documented. forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, fabricated medical records, fake power of attorney documents. Everything designed to make me appear incompetent while systematically draining my assets. But the most chilling discovery was how long they'd been planning this. The medical records showed they'd been building a case for my mental incompetence for over a year, creating a paper trail that would justify everything from financial control to my eventual death. By Friday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive case file. The evidence was overwhelming, systematic, and would make any prosecutor smile. But as I sat surrounded by proof of my son's betrayal, I realized this was only part of the story. They were in Las Vegas now, probably realizing their plan had failed. Sabrina would be furious, Brennan panicking, both scrambling to develop a backup strategy. The threatening letters showed creditors weren't patient people. They needed that insurance money soon. I had the financial evidence, but I needed to know what they'd do when their first plan failed. Friday evening brought the sound of car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the living room window, I watched Brennan and Sabrina emerge from their rental car with rigid postures that spoke of barely contained frustration. Their Las Vegas getaway had clearly not gone according to plan. I positioned myself in my recliner, feigning casual ease while they entered without their usual greetings. "No, Dad, how are you feeling?" or "We brought you something." Instead, Sabrina's heels clicked sharply across the hardwood floor, while Brennan dragged their luggage with unnecessary force. "Fred," Sabrina said, her voice lacking its typical artificial warmth, "you're looking better?" The pause before better was telling. She'd expected to find me weakened, perhaps hospitalized. "Actually," I said, deciding to test their reactions, "I've been feeling rather weak since you left. Dizzy spells, some chest tightness." The transformation in their faces was immediate. Brennan's expression shifted from disappointment to genuine concern mixed with something calculating. His internal conflict played out across his features. The son who still loved his father, warring with the desperate man who needed his father dead. Sabrina showed no such complexity. Her eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Don't worry about your health, Fred," she said, settling onto the couch with predatory grace. "Nature has its own timeline." The clinical detachment sent chills down my spine. This wasn't a concerned daughter-in-law. This was someone discussing a business transaction. "Your insurance policy shows real foresight," she continued conversationally. $750,000 is substantial planning for someone your age. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Sabrina, maybe we should—" "Sometimes accidents happen to elderly people living alone," she interrupted, never breaking eye contact with me, especially those experiencing health issues. The threat was wrapped in concern, but the message was crystal clear. I maintained mild confusion, playing the aging father who didn't grasp the implications. "I've been thinking," Sabrina continued, pulling a folder from her purse, "you should sign additional paperwork. Power of attorney updates healthcare directives. Things that would help Brennan if your condition worsens." My son finally found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. "Dad, maybe you should see a doctor. Get a full checkup." Genuine anguish filled his words, and for a moment I glimpsed the boy I'd raised. But Sabrina's sharp look silenced him. "Siguma, stairs can be dangerous at your age, Fred," she said, tone conversational, but meaning unmistakable. "We worry about you navigating this big house alone, especially with dizzy spells." The house I'd lived in for 30 years suddenly felt like a trap. Every step, every corner became a potential weapon in their hands. "Perhaps I should consider my options," I said carefully. Sabrina's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "Very wise, Fred. Very wise indeed." As they retreated to their room that night, I heard muffled voices through the walls. Occasional words drifted through. Soon, careful, and most chillingly, natural causes. Sitting alone in my study, I realized the full scope of their desperation. The gambling debts weren't disappearing. Creditors wouldn't wait indefinitely. Now that their airplane plan had failed, they were moving to something far more immediate and dangerous. They weren't just planning to steal from me anymore. They intended to eliminate me entirely right here in my own home. The dizzy spells I'd mentioned had given them ideas. The stairs Sabrina had referenced weren't casual conversation. They were reconnaissance. I realized they weren't giving up. They were just changing tactics. Saturday morning found me sitting across from Fitzgerald Gray in his downtown Phoenix office. I'd called him at 7 a.m., and despite the early hour, he'd agreed to see me immediately. "Mr. Ashworth," he said, reviewing the documents spread across his desk, "this is one of the most comprehensive elder abuse cases I've encountered." I'd brought everything, financial records, showing 52,000 in unauthorized transfers, Serafina's recording of Sabrina's chilling conversation, forged signatures, fabricated medical records, and my documented timeline. The evidence was damning. The recording alone would support attempted murder charges. He continued, but combined with financial fraud, we're looking at multiple felonies. I want to move fast, I told him. They're planning something immediate. Last night they discussed natural causes in stair accidents. Gray nodded grimly. Then we implement emergency strategy. First, I'll file motions to freeze all your bank accounts immediately. Any access attempts will be blocked and documented. He made notes on his legal pad. Second, we'll revoke every forged power of attorney document. I'll file new legitimate ones that specifically exclude them from financial authority. What about my will? We'll execute a new one today. Everything goes to charity. Makes their motive pointless. Even if something happens, they get nothing. Within hours, Gray had contacted judges, filed emergency motions, and begun building a criminal case. Now for surveillance, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm recommending a security company specializing in domestic situations. Hidden cameras, audio devices, panic buttons. If they try anything, we'll have documentation. The idea of turning my home into a surveillance operation felt surreal, but necessary. How long before it's ready? Oh, by tomorrow evening. But Fred, you must act completely normal. Don't let them suspect you know anything. We need them to reveal more plans on camera. I'd need to maintain the performance. The confused elderly father who didn't understand his danger. I've been practicing that role for months. Gray handed me a business card with a handwritten number. Detective Bartholomew Knox, Phoenix PD. He's briefed on your situation. If you feel immediate danger, call this number. Before leaving, I called Serafina Brooks. Her voice was steady when she answered. Mr. Ashworth, I've preserved the original recording and made multiple copies. I'll testify whenever needed. What they tried to do, it ends with you. The drive home gave me time to process what I was undertaking. I approached this like an audit, systematic, thorough, leaving no stone unturned. Every detail had to be perfect, every piece of evidence properly documented. Brennan and Sabrina were watching television when I returned, displaying forced casualness. They looked up as I entered, and I saw Sabrina's eyes assess my demeanor, searching for signs of weakness or suspicion. "How was your morning, Fred?" she asked with artificial concern. "Oh, just errands," I replied, maintaining my slightly confused tone. "Banking, you know. Sometimes I forget what I've done." The slight smile crossing her face told me she'd interpreted my words exactly as intended. An elderly man whose memory was failing, whose grip on affairs was loosening. Perfect. That evening, reviewing the day's accomplishments in my study, I felt cold satisfaction. Bank accounts were frozen. The will was changed. Surveillance equipment would be installed tomorrow. Detective Knox was on standby. Legal protections were in place, evidence was documented, and help was a phone call away. They thought they were hunting a helpless old man, but they'd underestimated their prey completely. The trap was set. Now I had to play the role of the helpless victim while gathering the final. The surveillance equipment was installed by Tuesday evening. Tiny cameras disguised as smoke detectors, audio devices hidden in air vents. My home had become a high-tech trap, and I was the bait. Wednesday morning, I began the most dangerous performance of my life. "I'm feeling quite dizzy today," I announced at breakfast, letting my hand shake as I reached for my coffee. "These spells seem to be getting worse." Brennan looked up with genuine concern, but Sabrina's reaction was different. A quick flash of interest before arranging her features into false sympathy. "Perhaps you should rest more, Fred," she said sweetly. "Take it easy on those stairs." Over the next few days, I perfected my act. Stumbling slightly when walking, pausing at the staircase as if gathering courage, mentioning dizzy spells and chest tightness. Each symptom energized Sabrina while tearing Brennan apart with conflicting emotions. Thursday night brought the conversation I'd been waiting for. They thought I was asleep upstairs, but the audio equipment captured every word from their bedroom below. "The old fool is getting weaker." Perfect timing. Sabrina's voice came through crystal clear. "Are you sure about the stair plan?" Brennan asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Elderly falls are very common. No one questions them." I lay in bed listening to them plan my murder with clinical detachment. The details were horrifyingly specific. "We'll increase his heart medication dosage gradually," Sabrina explained. "Just enough to make him dizzy. Then Friday evening, when he's coming down for dinner, a little push at the top of the stairs. What if someone gets suspicious? We wait exactly 30 minutes before calling 911. Gives us time to establish our story. We were in the kitchen, heard a crash, found him at the bottom. Dr. Ashcroft will confirm natural causes. The mention of Dr. Mortimer Ashcroft confirmed they'd corrupted a medical professional. He's been nothing but a burden for too long anyway, Sabrina continued with casual cruelty. Brennan's voice cracked. What if someone gets suspicious? Sabrina's laugh was cold as winter. I've done this before. Remember, my first husband also had an accident. Made it look like a heart attack. The key is patience and proper preparation. She'd murdered before. This wasn't desperation, it was a pattern. Friday brought additional pressure. I overheard Sabrina on phone calls with creditors, her voice sharp with panic. 1 more week, she kept saying. The money will be available in 1 more week. The timeline was accelerating. They couldn't wait any longer. That afternoon, Brennan approached me in my study, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, I thought he might confess everything. Dad, he began, then stopped staring at his hands. I love you. You know that, right? It sounded like goodbye. Of course, son, I replied, maintaining my confused act while my heart broke. By evening, I had everything recorded. Their complete plan, Sabrina's confession to previous murder, the timeline for my death, even Dr. Ashcroft's role. The audio quality was perfect, legally admissible, and utterly damning. But as I reviewed the evidence, I realized something terrifying. They weren't planning for next week anymore. Sabrina's phone calls had grown more desperate, the creditors more threatening. The gambling debts were coming due, and patience was running out. I had everything I needed, but they were planning to act within days. 2 weeks of careful surveillance had given me everything I needed. But Sunday evening brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. I was reading in my study when I heard Sabrina's sharp intake of breath from the living room. Brennan, her voice cut through the house like a blade. Get in here! Now! I quietly moved to my doorway and peered down the hallway. Sabrina stood frozen beneath the smoke detector, staring up at the tiny red LED light that betrayed the camera's presence. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes burned with fury. That son of a bitch, she whispered. He knows? Brennan appeared looking confused until Sabrina pointed upward. The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. How long do you think? He started. All of it, Sabrina snapped. He's heard everything. She began moving through the house with predatory efficiency, checking every room, every corner. Here, here, and here, she called out, finding camera after camera. The bastard turned his own house into a recording studio. I retreated to my bedroom, knowing the endgame was upon us. Through the surveillance feed on my phone, I watched them tear through the house, their panic escalating with each device they discovered. By midnight, they'd found most of the equipment, but the damage was done. Everything had been recorded and transmitted to secure servers. At 2 a.m., my bedroom door exploded open. Sabrina stood silhouetted in the doorway, kitchen knife gleaming in her hand. Behind her, Brennan looked like a broken man, tears streaming down his face. You clever old bastard, she snarled, stepping into the room. You should have just died quietly. I sat up slowly, maintaining the calm that 40 years of high-pressure audits had taught me. How long have you known? Her voice was arctic, deadly. Long enough, I replied evenly. Long enough to document everything. Brennan finally found his voice, though it cracked with emotion. Dad, I'm sorry. I never wanted this. I was just so desperate. The debts, the threats. I didn't know how else. Shut up, Brennan, Sabrina whirled on him. He's heard everything anyway. She turned back to me, the knife steady in her grip. You want to know the truth? I killed my first husband, too. Made it look like a heart attack. Digitalis in his morning coffee, untraceable after a few hours. The clinical way she described murder sent chills through me, but I kept my voice steady. I know about Dr. Ashcroft. I know about the gambling debts. I know about all of it. Her laugh was sharp and bitter. Then you know you're a dead man. Tonight you're going to have a real accident, and this time no flight attendant will save you. She raised the knife, and I saw her decision crystallize. No more elaborate plans, no more waiting. Just murder, brutal and immediate. The only problem, I said quietly, is that you're not the only ones who've been planning. My hand found the panic button I'd kept beside my bed for weeks. One press sent an immediate alert to Detective Knox's phone along with my exact location and a code word that meant imminent danger. Sabrina lunged forward, but before the knife could reach me, the house erupted with sound. Fists pounding on the front door, voices shouting through megaphones. "Phoenix PD, open the door. This is the police." Sabrina froze the knife inches from my chest. Through the bedroom window, red and blue lights painted the walls in alternating colors. The cavalry had arrived with perfect timing. "You called them," she breathed, understanding flooding her face. 3 weeks ago," I confirmed. "Detective Knox has been monitoring the situation. Every threat, every plan, every word you've spoken has been recorded and transmitted to the police department in real time." Brennan collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Sabrina stood motionless, the knife still in her hand, as the reality of her situation sank in. But I wasn't the helpless victim they thought I was. I had been 3 steps ahead all along. The front door splintered open as Detective Bartholomew Knox led his team into the house. I heard boots pounding up the stairs, voices shouting commands, and then my bedroom filled with armed officers. "Drop the weapon now." Sabrina stood frozen for a heartbeat, the kitchen knife still raised above me. Her eyes darted between the officers and the window, calculating escape routes that didn't exist. When she finally lunged toward Detective Knox, 2 officers tackled her simultaneously, wrestling the blade from her grip as she screamed obscenities. Brennan never resisted. The moment police entered the room, he collapsed to his knees, hands raised in surrender, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Dad," he kept repeating through his tears. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." Within minutes, both were handcuffed and read their rights. As they led Sabrina away, she turned back to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over, old man," she hissed. But it was. The evidence Detective Knox and his team collected that night was overwhelming. Hours of recorded conversations, financial documents proving systematic fraud, and my own testimony detailing months of psychological manipulation and threats. The investigation expanded rapidly. Within days, authorities in Nevada had reopened the case of Sabrina's first husband, whose heart attack at age 45 suddenly seemed far more suspicious. Toxicology tests on preserved tissue samples revealed traces of digitalis, exactly what Sabrina had described using. Dr. Mortimer Ashcroft was arrested the following week. Faced with evidence of his involvement and the prospect of lengthy prison time, he quickly agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. 1 month later, I sat in the gallery of Maricopa County Superior Court as Judge Pemberton called the proceedings to order. The trial had drawn significant media attention, a case of family betrayal, attempted murder, and financial fraud that seemed ripped from a crime novel. Prosecutor Theodora Sterling presented the case with methodical precision that reminded me of my own auditing techniques. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, building an unshakable foundation of guilt. Serafina Brooks took the stand, first her voice steady, as she described the conversation she'd overheard and recorded on Flight 447. The audio played in the courtroom, Sabrina's cold voice discussing altitude and heart attacks, filling the space with chilling clarity. Theodora Grimsby from First National Bank testified about the $52,000 in fraudulent transfers, presenting bank records that showed the systematic theft of my life savings. Dr. Octavia Sterling's testimony was particularly damning for the defense. Her comprehensive psychological evaluation confirmed my complete mental competency, destroying any argument that I was a confused elderly man, misinterpreting innocent family concerns. The defense offered little beyond claims of misunderstanding and financial desperation. How do you explain away recorded conversations about murder-forged signatures and detailed plans for staged accidents? When the verdicts came, they were swift and unanimous. Judge Pemberton's voice was grave as he delivered the sentences. The court finds the evidence of premeditated murder conspiracy overwhelming and the betrayal of family trust particularly heinous. Sabrina Vance received 25 years for 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. My case and her first husband's death, which had been reclassified as homicide. Her face remained stone cold as the sentence was read. Brennan received 12 years with possibility of reduction to 8 if he continued cooperating with authorities. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw not the calculating criminal who'd plotted my death, but the broken man who'd lost himself to desperation and his wife's manipulation. Dr. Mortimer Ashcroft received 7 years for conspiracy and falsifying medical records, his medical license permanently revoked. As I watched the bailiffs lead them away in shackles, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness. The system had worked exactly as it should. Evidence had been gathered, justice had been served, criminals had been punished. But standing on the courthouse steps afterward, watching Brennan disappear into the prison transport van, I realized the true cost of this victory. Justice was served, but the price was losing the son I thought I knew. 6 months after the trial, I sat in my study watching the Arizona sunrise paint the desert landscape in shades of gold. The house felt peaceful again, not the tense quiet of those months living with potential murderers, but the serene calm of a man who'd survived his greatest test. The morning routine had become meditation, coffee, newspaper, and reflection on a journey that transformed me from naive victim to determined survivor. 40 years as a certified public accountant had taught me that numbers don't lie, but people do. The lesson had never been more painfully clear than when applied to my own family. A letter arrived Tuesday morning, postmarked from Arizona State Prison. Brennan's handwriting was shaky, uncertain. "Dad," it began, "I know I have no right to ask forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Every day I wake up knowing I betrayed the man who gave me everything. I understand if you never want to see me again, but your son still exists, somewhere inside the man who tried to hurt you. And he loves you." I read it 3 times before deciding to visit him the following Saturday. Not because I'd forgotten his crimes, but because people could change, and sometimes redemption required witnesses. The man I met across the visiting table was hollow-eyed and broken, but genuinely remorseful. We talked about responsibility, consequences, and the long road to forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, that would take years, but it was a beginning. My new purpose emerged gradually. I began volunteering at the Phoenix Senior Center, teaching financial literacy and helping elderly residents recognize warning signs of family fraud. The stories were heartbreaking. Children and caregivers systematically stealing from those who trusted them most. Detective Knox invited me to speak at police training seminars. "You're the one who got away," he told me. "Your experience could save lives." Serafina Brooks and I maintained regular contact. She'd found peace knowing her intervention had saved me, and we'd developed an unlikely friendship built on shared understanding of family betrayal. At senior center presentations, I always ended with the same message. Family should protect you, not prey on you. Trust your instincts and always verify what people tell you about your finances. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The most important lesson wasn't financial. It was about trust. Not every family deserves blind faith, but that doesn't mean losing faith in human goodness entirely. Serafina had proven that strangers sometimes care more about our welfare than our own blood relatives. Last month, a woman approached me after a Scottsdale presentation. "Your story made me realize what my daughter-in-law was doing. I confronted her yesterday and she admitted taking money. I'm pressing charges." Moments like that made sharing my pain worthwhile. The desert sunset painted my study walls as I finished reflecting on this journey. Somewhere in prison, Sabrina was probably planning her next scheme. Brennan was hopefully learning to be the man I'd tried to raise, and I was here alive and alert, ready to help others avoid the trap I'd escaped. Numbers don't lie, people do, but sometimes the truth sets everyone free. Looking back on this journey, I realize how close I came to becoming just another statistic, an elderly man who trusted blindly and paid with his life. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the warning signs when family members suddenly show unusual interest in your finances or insurance policies. God gave us instincts for a reason. When something feels wrong, usually is. I almost dismissed those feelings as paranoia, and it nearly cost me everything. The Lord works in mysterious ways. He sent Serafina Brooks to save my life when I couldn't save myself. Sometimes strangers become our angels. This true story taught me that numbers don't lie, but people do. Even family. Especially family sometimes. Trust, but verify. Always verify. Check your bank statements. Know who has access to your accounts, and never sign documents under pressure. Like other grandpa stories you might hear, mine has a lesson buried in the pain. The difference is this true story actually happened, and it could happen to you. Financial predators often wear familiar faces. They know your routines, your weaknesses, your kind heart. But here's what I want you to remember. God protected me through this ordeal, giving me the wisdom to gather evidence and the courage to fight back. He can protect you too, but you have to stay alert. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings wrapped in wisdom. Don't let your true story end the way mine almost did. If this resonates with you, please share it with someone who might need this warning. Hit that subscribe button to hear more stories that could save lives. And tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed suspicious behavior from family members? Your story might help someone else recognize the danger before it's too late. Sometimes the most important grandpa stories are the ones that keep you alive.